Hello and welcome to the live making of December's All the Everything. Welcome, welcome. And I am very pleased it's the topic that it is. So once again, I'm very thankful to our lovely Facebook group members who chose this topic. One, because it was the topic I was hoping would win, which often is the case. I promise. Well, funny enough, there was an example the other day where I said to Jonathan, yes, but I didn't create it. It just happened magically. He was like, Lian, you created it magically. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I suppose I did. And I think probably a similar thing happens is in every month, I have one of the topics. So we do the poll where members vote on whichever topic they want me to record the show on. In fact, our theme for the whole month, every single time, it's the one that I wanted of those three. And I never do anything, supposedly, to influence said outcome, apart from maybe I am doing that magically. I don't know, but I was very pleased it was this topic yet again. But I was particularly pleased because this has been a really, really busy time in my life generally, but particularly within the world of Waking the Wild, for a couple of reasons I'll probably get into a bit in a mo. And I had no time to prepare for this. I literally started writing some notes at about 20 past, what time was it? Honestly, it's been a bonkers day, about 20 past 4. And then it started at 5. So I had hardly any time. And thank goodness it's this topic, because of all topics in the world that if I needed to talk about and had no prep time, this would be the one I would choose every time. So I'm so grateful to our members back in the past for choosing this topic. It has done me a favor, and hopefully it will mean that what I do talk about will be, I guess, the most alive, fresh expression of this topic it could possibly be. So, as ever, I'm going to talk about what I've been consuming and creating. I'm going to make that very brief, and then jump into our main topic, what it means to embody the feminine and why it's so powerful. So I'm going to do it in which order? I'm going to start with what I've been consuming because it's going to be super quick. I haven't been consuming enough. The truth of the matter is, and this is actually very related to today's topic. Normally, I have the very reason, I've shared this before, the very reason I talk about what I've been consuming and what I've been creating at the start of every show is this is a really important balance for me. I very intentionally keep myself not just kind of topped up to a full cup, but I keep myself overflowing with whatever I need to have coming in order to be able to give out at the rate I do. And that consumption can come in all sorts of forms, so many different forms. It would be impossible for me to list them all. But they're all the ways that I nourish myself, allow myself to receive inspiration, allow myself to kind of relax and be looked after, practices that just allow me to lean back, rest, receive. So that's something that I have an abundance of in my life. And I also give out in an abundance. So because I constantly keep myself topped up, that is just a flow that happens. And I very, very, very rarely feel depleted. That's not a common experience for me at all. Earlier this week, I realized I'm actually feeling a bit depleted. And as I said, it's been a particularly intense time lately. And I realized that that balance had just kind of got out of flow, and I'd been giving out so much and hadn't been consuming enough to keep myself in overflow. So that's the truth. I've not been consuming at the same rate as I normally do. So that's really what I wanted to share with you. Rather than share specific things I've been consuming, just notice this is something that's very, very rare for me. I have not been consuming enough. Moving on to what I've been creating, which, as I say, has actually been a little bit too much for reasons that have been a mixture of things that I planned and in hindsight perhaps hadn't planned as wisely as I could have done, and just seemingly unplanned events. I mean, we could say, well, if I'm creating my whole reality, ultimately I did create them, but I certainly didn't consciously create the amount of things that have kind of been in my field in the last week or two. But a couple of things I wanted to share with you specifically that I've been creating in the last month, but particularly in the last week. One of them, and members of our Facebook group will have heard me mentioning, me finding a beautiful corpse of a barn owl. And there's a whole story to that, which I'm not going to go into at the moment. And I've actually recorded a podcast on power animals, which will be out probably in the next month or so, and actually go deep into the story of finding this owl and what it means to me. And so if you're interested in that, look out for that particular episode, because I share far more about it anyway. I spent a lot of time working with this owl, the spirit of the owl, the body of the owl. And the body wasn't in a state that meant very much of it could be kept. What I have kept is a number of the wing feathers, which I can show you. If you're watching this on video, I can show you an example of one of the beautiful wing feathers. And I think this was quite a young one. So barn owls are actually quite big owls, so that's a fairly small feather. That's probably one of the longest feathers that was on this particular owl. So it was a smallish owl, but really beautiful. I mean, look at the pattern and colouring. And then the other thing I had from the owl is this skull. I don't know how well you can see that. Again, if you're watching on camera, perhaps we'll put a link on the show notes. If you're watching this on, listening to this, sorry, on the podcast, you can go and have a look if you're interested at the video of me showing these things. It seems like it's not contrasting very well. Let's show if against the background might be a bit better. Don't know if that helps. I'm going to show you also the buzzard that I received last year in similar circumstances. And again, I mentioned all this on the power animal, so you can see quite an interesting contrast when you see the pair of them. So from the front, and I'd never thought before what an owl skull would look like. But if I'm honest, if someone had asked me, embarrassingly, I probably would have thought it had this like big round skull. I don't know if I'd had time to sort of think about it logically, I may not have actually said that out loud, but in my mind, I would have imagined this big round skull. But as you can see, they're not. Buzzard here on the right, I had to think about that because my left and right are just, it's an autistic thing, I think. I don't know, but I get my left and right mixed up all the time. But this side here is the buzzard, this side here is the barn owl, which again shows you how small the barn owl was, how young it was, because that's would ordinarily, I'm assuming, on an adult barn owl be much bigger. So look at those beaks, So that was this is literally now, you know, probably just over a week, I think coming up 2 weeks ago, this was covered in decaying flesh, maggots, was not a pretty sight. And now it is, well, for me, and I know clearly it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but for me now, that is a thing of absolute beauty, a real expression of spirit on this earthly realm. So that is one of the things I have been creating, if you can call that creating. I've sort of played a part in the creation, let's say, this month. And so now it's joining, I've got a collection of different skulls that I've come by and worked with over the last few years. So it joins badger, crow, buzzard and squirrel on my desk. The other thing I've been creating is the Waking the Wild Sovereign Circle. And I spoke a bit about Waking Wild Sovereign, I think, in my what I've been creating last month. So very briefly, it's the circle itself that I wanted to share with you. This is co-creation with Jonathan, and we held the Sovereign Circle for the 9 queens. It turned out to be all queens for this particular one. And my goodness, It was quite something, just pure magic, so much power. It's very different to, while circles are something that we weave into all of our group programs, this circle was very, very different, intentionally so. We intentionally created with a very different energetic. It's not to say that sovereignty isn't weaved into everything we do, because it absolutely is, but there was a real focus, meticulous focus on that sovereign energy in this circle, and then the way that we held it, what took place within it was very different. And yes, it was just like power off the charts, amazing group of queens, and very very different as well. Like within that group there were kind of women at like opposite ends of the spectrum in various ways, and then coming together. And there was a particular moment between two of the women where it was just like almost like the air was crackling, even though it's happening online. I mean, if that had happened in a room, my goodness, God knows what would have been happening out in the weather patterns around us, because it was like this crackle in this air whilst these two queens connected and agreed to kind of do something outside of the circle. And you could just see the rest of us, like our sort of chins were on the floor, we're like, wow, this is special. So that is something that was a creation that was, yeah, really stood out for me this month as something really extraordinary, really extraordinary. Okay, moving on now to the main show, the main topic, what it means to embody the feminine and why it's so powerful. I want to start with this quote. I'm going to go into all the things around the feminine, what I mean by it, why we might do it. But this quote was something I want to share at the start, because it captured for me so much of what this is really about, what this work of embodying the feminine is really about. It takes it to a place that I think just makes this real and meaningful, and something, despite the challenges, despite the resistance, makes it something we might want to do. So many women, having taken the hero's journey, only to find it personally empty and dangerous for humanity. Women emulated the male heroic journey because there were no other images to emulate. And that's by Maureen Murdoch, who is the author of The Heroine's Journey. It's not particularly like hopeful, inspiring quote. However, this is the why. This is what calls us into the feminine. It's that what we see out there, whether or not we're naming it as the hero's journey, whether or not we're naming it as the masculine, it's recognizing that before we start to consciously journey into the feminine, we start to notice things are feeling empty. The way I'm living, the way I'm working is feeling empty. And then if we are a little bit more conscious, a bit more aware, or a bit further along this path, we recognize, we may not use that word, dangerous humanity, but we start to recognize that things are not working too well, not just for us in our own lives, but out there in the world, when this embodiment of the feminine is lacking. And so this is the work of bringing that back into our lives and back into a world that brings fullness. Again, that word empty, I think, is a really good one. The feminine starts to flow into our lives, into our world, in a way that brings something that nourishes us all and is so needed. I feel like I say this phrase over and over again about things being the medicine the world needs, but my goodness, when it comes to the feminine, it really is just that. So what do we mean by the feminine? As ever, I started by having a look and saw what dictionary definitions of this particular word might be. And a couple of them are conception of a timeless or idealized feminine nature. Another one is characteristic of or appropriate or unique to women. And I want to say that whilst there may be a bit of overlap between what I'm about to describe as the feminine, it really is something way beyond that, way beyond that, and before that. Really, when I'm talking about the feminine, I'm meaning an archetypal energy. It is an archetypal energy, and one of the primary ones, I would say, that shows up in all sorts of other ways that we might name by completely different words, or they may seem like slightly related, but this is a primary archetypal energy that is beyond us really being able to kind of capture it in these like nice, neat ideas, which is why I'm going to ask you to feel into what it means for you, which is the way that I teach archetypes all the time. Whether it be as we're journeying through Wake and Wild Feminine, as I've just have been, we've been working with the archetypes, the Queen, the Wild Woman, and the Lover. And although I'm technically teaching the feminine and teaching these archetypes, I actually do very little in the way of like directly teaching that this archetype means this. My work when I'm teaching an archetype is very much to guide that person I'm working with, that group that I'm working with, to open, to receive their own embodied experience of that archetype, to allow themselves, whilst these archetypes are universal, they do have characteristics, aspects, patterns. How they'll be received into each person is going to be unique to them because they're unique. And so me trying to imprint or say like this is how it should be because that's my interpretation means that that's going to get in the way of that person actually opening to receive their own embodiment of that archetypal energy. And so this is exactly the same as far as I'm concerned when we're talking about the feminine as we might be when we're talking about the Queen or the Lover or the Priestess or any of the other archetypes we might want to talk about. So I invite you to, as long as you are like, assuming you're not driving, I only do this clearly if you're in a position where you can do this, if not do it in your own way, whichever way makes sense to you. But first of all, close your eyes and we'll take a few slow breaths together. And then I invite you to notice. When I say the feminine, what is arising for you, the feminine? You might notice images, sensations, thoughts, emotions, memories, little snippets, maybe from poems or songs, books or films. Might be a just odd word or a sentence that skips through your mind. Just spend a few moments just noticing what's arising for you. And it may be a mixture of all those different things I've said, and it might be something else entirely. The feminine, what is arising for you? No, whatever is arising is perfect for you. No need to judge it at all. Excellent. Now I'm going to ask you, how does what's been evoked, how does that feel in your body? How does the experience of the feminine, it's been evoked for you as I asked you how that was arising for you. How does that feel in your body? What sensations are arising? And now I invite you to notice how you can expand that sensation you have with the feminine. Allow that to grow. Allow it to expand and deepen in your body. You might notice it's kind of located in a particular place and you expand it out from there. Just allow that to build, to grow. Wonderful. And now from there, just notice, are there maybe a few words, up to 5, maybe anything between 3 and 5 words? What words would you use to capture that experience you're in, the sensations that are in your body? If you were to name 3 to 5 words to capture that, what would they be? Wonderful. Okay, so the good thing is, in terms of going back to the title of this show around embodying the feminine, that's exactly what you've just done. If you've experienced the feminine in your body and how that felt for you, that was you embodying the feminine. So we've already done what it said on the tin. And so this is something to be really aware of. You have had, if you, whatever you've experienced, and it doesn't matter, it was only a tiny bit, doesn't matter if you only had one word, it might be that you actually had this kind of full-blown experience in Technicolor and have like a billion words. Whatever level you experienced it to is perfect. It's what was right for you, and you don't need to judge that. As I say, that is perfect for you, for where you are right now. Obviously, this isn't a two-way thing. I'd love to be able to say to you, what were those words? Unfortunately, we can't do that. However, I'm going to share some of the words that I know come up often for people when they do practices like this. And some of these are actually words that were shared in our Facebook group in the pre-show party. So we always do a pre-show party before I do the live making the show. And some of these came up in that pre-show party. And some of these are also words that I would use to express my experience of this. And again, please don't feel that these are the right words. Don't feel that if you didn't experience this, you had it wrong. Don't feel that you now need to kind of, if that you're feeling like a sense of being curious or a sense of like, or openness to any of these words, it might be that they are for you. But please don't kind of intellectually go, okay, well, that's what the feminine is, I need to be that, because that really is not what this is about. So some of the words that show up when people do this work are receptivity. Sorry, I've just been joined by both dogs at once. Receptivity, sensitivity, openness, abundance, soft, power, flow, inwards, sensuality, maternity, that's all I have at the moment, but you can see there's a real mixture of words there, and these are just ones that again either were shared before in the pre-show party, I've heard other women talk about, or were just arising for me. And hopefully you can see that there was, you know, real range there. And this is when we're talking about the feminine, again, as this archetypal energy that we're experiencing in our bodies. So there is this archetypal energy that exists, you know, wherever you might think it exists, kind of all around us. And then in that moment, we're consciously opening to experience it, to embody it. We are then experiencing that for ourselves in our bodies. And I'm hoping you can hear that whilst we might have this like cultural view of femininity, which might, you know, depending on your view on it, depending on the wounds you've got around it, the kind of baggage you have around it, you might see as something like, you know, simpering or weak or girly. And I'm really hoping you're hearing there's something more, something beyond that is available to us when we allow ourselves to experience it directly and for ourselves. Okay, so of course, then, even if we're feeling a call to do this, to embody the feminine more so, to bring this into our lives, we're likely going to have resistance show up. And for me, when I felt this call to the feminine, there was so much resistance, so much resistance, both a conscious kind of sense of like, hell no, that is a stupid idea. Like, who would want to do this? I'd come from a background of being raised as a feminist. I had a lot of wounding around the idea of femininity and really being a woman. And so there was a lot of very conscious no to it. You know, that is ridiculous. That is not for me. I also, as I then stepped foot onto this path, had a huge amount of wounds being triggered by doing so. That is when we'll really start to meet those sort of darkest shadows, the deepest wounds. That's when we'll start to experience this. We may not know that at the outset, that that's what's going to happen, but believe me, what I've seen for most of us, that is what will happen. So why would we do that anyway? Why would we go down what I've just described as a pretty treacherous path? Well, there's two levels to this in terms of the kind of why. At the first level, there is like, why are we being called to it? It was really interesting as we were doing the pre-show party, looking at why, you know, why that might be showing up for us. And for me personally, it was very clearly a call from soul. And as I say, there was a bunch of resistance to it, which often is the case for me. Whenever I'm called to something, like straight away, there's kind of like my soul saying like, yep, go for it. And my humans going like, hell no. And this was probably one of the biggest examples of that. So I'd already been doing a lot of work to kind of open to listening to what my soul was calling me to. And then that's what came through. Sometimes it doesn't come in that form. Sometimes, and as one of the women in the Primal Happiness Facebook group shared, it was her body is calling her to it. And this is a really common way that the feminine will call women to her. And that can be through specific cycles in our life. So the menopause is a really big one, that is that call into the feminine. And so it can be experiencing very difficult perimenopause or menopause. It can be other aspects of our life where we might just notice there's a lot of pain, mystery illnesses, allergies, all sorts of ways where like, oh, my body's not happy. And it also can be a call from the wild, from nature, to reconnect to the earth. So these are ways that the feminine will call us. So that's the first level of why. It's like the kind of that deep why is the reason we even set foot on it. But then there's the kind of why in terms of, why would I do it if I'm feeling the call, as to almost like the benefits. And my goodness, they are huge. I'm going to talk a bit more again about kind of how the challenges show up. Before I do that, I'm just going to share a bit about why we might do that, because of how blooming gorgeous it is. What I've seen, and this is both personally and also through the many women I've taken on this journey, once we start to get even a little way along this path, we notice this feels natural. This feels like me being more me than I've ever been before. It feels like going from this sense of like effort to flow. And I don't mean that in this kind of, you know, simplified, just sort of glorifying it way. Increasingly, that is absolutely what our experience becomes. But again, even in the early stages of this path, we'll just notice like pockets of being more in this experience of flow, rather than this kind of effort, drive, to-do list kind of way of being. It's also, and I don't have, whilst I'm sure there's tons of research out there to actually prove this, I don't feel in this moment particularly like I need to go find it. What I've certainly experienced myself, certainly experienced with the women I work with, and it's also explained really beautifully in the book, The Queen's Code, is we just feel more well. We tend to have much less stress. And, you know, my goodness, is there research in terms of the negative impact on our body, our well-being via chronic stress. So our stress reduces, we are much more well. And I love, again, in the Queen's Code, it explains this because it's a story. It gives examples of when one of the main characters is going through a period where she is kind of being much more, I guess, in a masculinized way of being. And that's driving up her cortisol, creating more stress, and is actually wearing her out and making her feel unwell. So that's what I notice over and over again, both for myself and for other women. Like, we are just more well, less pain, less fatigue, just generally more healthy. And then linked to this, and I know all this sounds too good to be true, but I just I can only speak from what I've seen and experienced personally, and again, seen and experienced in other women. It just seems to open up all of the things that we say that we want. So we have more joy, more expression, more sensuality, more radiance, more creativity, more intimacy, like more of all the things that we might say we desire. This seems to be, to me, to be not just the, I guess, most effective path to those things, but it also, the path itself is so enjoyable. So for me, it really is like, you know, could there be any better thing? I don't think so. And the last thing, and again, this is a little bit like what came first, the chicken or the egg. As I say, for me, it really was, I'd already I guess walk through the portal to soul. So for me, this was like a deepening on the path of soul. But for some women, and again, many of the women in Awaken Wild Feminine at the moment, I think would say this is true for them. They hear the call to the feminine first and then discover it's a portal to soul. It's a portal to becoming who they came here to be. And they don't know that at the outset. They feel, for whatever reason, and for the reasons I said earlier, this call to the feminine. And quite a lot of the time when women come into our work, and it might be specifically Awaken Wild Feminine or one of our other crucibles, because ultimately they all contain the work of the feminine or the masculine, if that's what's for you. And it doesn't take too long to recognize, like, oh, I had no idea why I chose into, say, Awaken Wild Feminine. I didn't really know why I came to it. I don't really know what I was going to get out of it. But now I'm here, I can see actually it was a call from my soul. And so I hear that in one way or another so many times now. It's so clear to me, like, that's what it actually is. And another Maureen Murdoch quote that I think speaks to this so beautifully is, the spiritual experience for women is one of moving more deeply into self rather than out of self. The spiritual experience for women is one of moving more deeply into self rather than out of self. And another way of seeing this is through something I speak about a lot, which is the path of ascension, which is up and out to spirit, to oneness, to unity. So a really necessary and beneficial part of the path if we want to come here and have the full experience we came here to have. And then there's the descent that's going in and downwards into the body, into the soul, into the earth. The other part of that isn't mentioned in this, which is the work that is, again, we see as absolutely vital to the path of Awaken Wild, which is sovereignty. So that's kind of sits in the middle, and it's through sovereignty that we get to have the fullest experience of both the ascent and the descent. So whilst it can seem that, you know, in order to be spiritual, we need to try and kind of like get out of the body and not really see the body as something particularly important, not see self as important, not see our uniqueness as important, because it's about coming out of that and into oneness. For women, the experience of coming, and this quote in the book is particularly for women. I think what I'm about to say is also true in a different way for men too, but just for a moment, let's stick to women. That work of having the deepest spiritual experience comes for going more deeply into self. Okay, I'm going to take a breather and have a quick gulp of my drink before I move into the rest of this show. So I said I was going to talk a little bit more about the way these the challenges, the wounds, the shadows show up along the path, because again, for me, this isn't, it can sound like, oh, the feminine, you know, this is just going to be glorious. And Sarah often talks about, you know, women kind of just sort of playing dress up and, you know, putting on kind of goddess outfits and flouncing around the beach. Like, yes, if that's an aligned expression for you, like, go at it. There's no wrong making of doing that. You know, there's some gorgeous, you know, beautiful, playful, expressive aspects of the feminine. Yes. And if we are truly deeply walking on this path, it will also be dark. It will also be painful. It will also include grief. It will also require our deepest devotion and submitting to our soul and to whatever experiences are going to allow us to go even deeper. It really does need to include those aspects to truly be the path of the feminine. And so it really, again, has to involve us doing the work to reclaim what's been held in shadow, the experiences we've had. And this can be ancestral, this can be cultural, this can be personal, things that have happened within our family, within our own lives. All of these experiences we've had create closures that we are going to have that are going to mean that until we move past them, we are not going to be able to open to embody the fullness of the feminine. So this is going to, again, require that we do that. We can't embody the feminine and kind of like do it across the wounds that are in place. We're going to need to dip down and go into them. I think I had a quote here that, oh yes, here it is. This is a gorgeous one, another Maureen Murdoch one. A woman who has the courage to descend into the realms below the surface of her ordinary awareness will find feelings there she has chosen not to experience before. And when it says chosen not to experience before, it's not necessarily that we've consciously chosen not to experience them before. It's because there is, in all innocence, in all sort of well-meaning attempts from parts of us to keep us safe, it hasn't felt it's safe to do so. We've created this way of being, these patterns of being that have kept us safe, has got to us to where we are. So whilst it says like chosen to experience, yes, on one level we could see that we have chosen it, but largely that's going to be out of our conscious awareness. We've just not been available to experience those feelings. So as we do this work, as we start to recognize what's being required of us, we will then start to experience that which has been held in these wounds. And these can be all sorts of things. There'll be things to do with our experiences of sexuality, experiences of the feminine, of women, other women, whether we can trust them, whether they are going to hurt us, whether they're going to abandon us. Same with the masculine, same with men. It's going to be, again, the greatest opportunity we possibly could have to meet those parts of us we've not been ready to meet before. And I'm going to read a Peter Levine quote from Waking the Tiger. I think that's right. I think when I quoted it before, I accidentally said Waking the Wild Tiger for fairly obvious reasons, but it's not. It's called Waking the Tiger. Amazing book on trauma and how trauma is held in the body. I always recommend it alongside The Body Keeps the Score. Both amazing books. And this quote that I want to share with you now is: healing will take place as formerly frozen elements of your experience are released from their trauma-serving tasks, enabling you to gradually thaw. I love that, enabling you to gradually thaw. And so this is the work again of bringing back what's been frozen, held in shadow frozen, literally, well, not literally frozen, but yeah, I feel like I can say literally. I know it isn't literally. It's not like water that's been frozen, but it very much is like energy that's been frozen, trapped in aspects of self, that then as we do this work to bring this back out of that trauma serving pattern, we then are able to reclaim that energy and use it consciously. Okay, so again, hardest work we're likely to ever do, and the most powerful work we're ever likely to do, because we really do get the opportunity to reclaim these parts of ourselves and embody what we came here for, express what we came here for. I'm going to share, practically speaking, what this looks like in terms of, I wonder if some of what I've said sounds a little bit kind of, okay, I get why we might want to do this. I get what it might require of me, but then what does that look like? Like, how does that show up in terms of your life then and your life now? I'm going to share some of the things, and this again is some of this is what I've seen in other women. I'm going to mostly share my own experience, but I've absolutely seen this show up for other women I've worked with too. But again, you'll have your own unique way this shows up. You are unique. Even if you are embodying the same archetypal energies, they're going to show up in your life differently to how they show up in mine, even though there likely will be commonalities. So here are some of the ways. So the first thing is I now have, I'm going to give you a very quick kind of before picture. So as I said, I grew up with a real disconnection to the feminine. Quite an extreme one, I'd say, based on my experience of seeing other women and their kind of level of disconnection to the feminine. I think I was probably one of the most extreme examples I've witnessed. And for me, the feminine, if I'd been asked this question years ago, I would have described the feminine, even if I could have, I don't necessarily know I would have seen the feminine in the way I do now as a thing, but either way, I think you'll get what I mean. I would have seen the feminine as weak, like needy, victimy, just messy, dangerous. I mean, really, there wasn't any, I don't think there would have been very many kind of positive qualities that would have been present for me. It really was something I'd done my best to kind of push out for you. I'd done for reasons, and I think I probably shared this on the show before, for various reasons, I kind of had created a kind of almost like feminine armor, as in I looked very much not feminine as a child, as very much that kind of stereotypical tomboy. But from about my teens onwards, I had crafted this very kind of like perfectly feminine image, both in terms of how I looked and also the environment. It turns out that was actually ironically very aligned for me. Beauty is really one of my highest values. So it turns out there was a kind of like overlay of the feminine underneath that was completely lacking. But as I've reclaimed the feminine, it turns out that my kind of external expression of that hasn't changed all that much. But my life was very, very linear, very archetypal masculine. I worked in a corporate. I was very like driven, rational. I really had a kind of repulsion to anything that was just like fluid and soulful and intangible. So I would almost like, not almost, I had gone as far into a non-feminine way of being as I possibly could have done. And again, there were like conscious reasons why I thought that was a good idea and thought that was safe and the right thing to do. And it was something that women are very rewarded for in our culture. We can fit well into a masculine world. We will be rewarded for it in many ways. We'll also suffer for it in many ways, but that's not in our awareness. So that was how I used to live. Now, and also like as I go through each of these different things, I may kind of suggest how that's been juxtaposed with how I used to live, but you'll probably be able to hear just in the examples the contrast. So now I am so aligned with my natural cycle. So primarily my menstrual cycle. I am always acutely aware of where I am in my cycle and how that feels in my body, in my energy levels, in my availability for certain things. And my bleed in particular is something I honor deeply. It's gone from being my least favorite part of my cycle. I used to get a lot of pain. I was very heavy, so it was incredibly messy. And it was just like the part of the month I dreaded and couldn't wait to be over. Now I love it. I look forward to it. I kind of get this like absolute excitement when I see the first drops of blood. I celebrate it and honor and work with it in so many ways. And as it ends, in fact, I'm just finishing my bleed now. I feel this sort of sense of grief, like, oh, it's gone for another month. So that is like night and day different. Like that one example could work as a metaphor probably for my whole relationship to the feminine. Actually, it really couldn't be a more of a stark difference. I also honor other cycles. I really notice how I spoke about that cycle of consumption and creativity right at the start of the show. I really am noticing my natural patterns of creativity, consumption, when I need to rest, when I'm very outgoing, when I want to go inwards, and I allow myself to flow in alignment with those. I don't override them like I used to. I also spend time every day, and it's so interwoven into my day now. It's actually, when I try and think of it, it's hard to like think of when I'm not doing this, if that makes sense. But I used to spend, I'm not kidding, my whole working day just glued to my computer. I mean, I'd only get up to go to the loo pretty much. Like my colleagues, thank goodness, bless them, used to deliver me like tea and coffee and stuff during the day. I'd often eat at my desk. I wouldn't even leave my desk for lunch. And I'd work, from the moment I started work right way through to when I'd finish, often quite late. Often I'd then get home and continue working. I mean, I literally was like so cut off from my body. It's like incredible to think I managed to even just not end up in a like more of a state. I mean, I had really bad sciatica. I was suffering from chronic facial pain, but I think, to be honest, like my body, bless it, must have been such a trooper for me to have not ended up in a worse state, because I really was so cut off. Whereas now, my goodness, I am so led by my body. I check in with my body like multiple times a day to see what's going on, where it's calling me to, what I desire, what it needs. It's all kind of like there as my I guess like a compass, really. It's incredible I can't even name how important that is now. It just seems like so second nature. It's hard to even like name it properly, because it's just there as just part of my being. I spend time every day just living a life of what I would describe the feminine. It could also be described as a life of soul, whether that be working with my dreams, reading poetry, dancing, being in nature. This again is just my life now. It just seems strange that I could live any other way. I'm in what you could describe as like a pull or receptive, energetic, way more than in a push. And that shows up in everything I do. And including, again, how I work, how I teach. I'm much more likely to invite people into experiences, inquiries, conversations, than I am to kind of push something on them. That's actually quite natural to me. I guess I'm more and more trusted that is what feels right for me. And so everything I do is much more from that kind of like drawing in, inviting, than pushing onwards. And that goes also to how my relationship to receiving. Again, going back to the start of the show, when I was asking what were the words that came up for you, a word that often does come up for people around the feminine is receptivity. And I am now so open to receive what is for me, which comes in so many forms. It comes in the form of support, guidance, money, opportunities, experiences, all sorts of things. It's now so natural for me to recognize, like, of course, like, how could I be any other way? And again, none of this has happened overnight. This has taken a lot of work to let go of patterns of control and closure. It didn't feel safe to be that way. Now that's just second nature. So hopefully that's some tangible ways that can make sense to you in terms of, like, what does that look like as a life? That's what that looks like as life for me. And as I said, it won't be exactly the same for you or any other person listening to this. You'll have your own examples, your own way of experiencing that. So I think I've explained what it means to embody the feminine. Have I explained why it's so powerful? It occurs to me quite simply that the power of this, like why it's so powerful, is just that it returns us to our natural power. This isn't about looking at some external model of power, which obviously, again, in our culture is often this a kind of masculinized ideal of it. Often it's also power over. It's this idea of something that is perhaps quite brash or hard. And more it looks to me that embodying the feminine is really a return to ourselves, our soul, our body, soft power. It really is a return to ourselves, and that is why it's so powerful. So if you are feeling the call to embody the feminine, here are some things I might suggest you look at as aligned actions. The first one is simply, are you feeling the call? You know, again, none of this is a prescription for everyone. You'll know if you are feeling the call, and if you're not, it's not for you now. That's completely okay. It might be that it's going to be for you another time. In that case, that's when to follow that path. Not until then. There is no, like, you have to do this. There really isn't. So check in. Are you feeling the call? The second thing is devote to this. It really isn't, for all the reasons I've said, this isn't an easy path. It's going to require your choice to devote to it. That's the only way you're going to be able to stay on it when you meet the challenges, when you feel the resistance, when you start to be plunged into your deepest wounds. Without that devotion, it's unlikely you're going to be able to stay on this path. So devote to it, make a very conscious choice, whatever language means. I remember when I first made the choice to live from soul, I didn't use the language of devotion then, but it was a very conscious choice. I spoke out to my then coach the words, I think I said it like this: I commit to living a soul-led life. I think that's maybe how I languaged it then. Again, because this was before my devotion to the feminine, even in the language, using the word commit, you can hear like the languaging itself is much more masculine. But whatever word makes sense to you, however you want to choose it, declare it. And then follow that next breadcrumb. As I always say, this does not need to be this like almighty leap, this complete life change. Just notice, what is that next breadcrumb for you? I'm going to make some suggestions of things that it could be. And if you hear something in this, great. If not, just look out for what that breadcrumb is for you. So some books that I could recommend as a breadcrumb, and reach out if you would like more. We've got a whole list of books that we can recommend, but some of the ones that I would say are particularly helpful are The Heroine's Journey, which I've already quoted from several times, The Wild Woman Way by Michaela Boehm, Women Who Run with the Wolves, which I normally quote loads, I just happen not to have today, which is by the amazing Clarissa Pinkola Estes. Also, I mentioned this earlier, the Queen's Code by the amazing Alison Armstrong, who's been on the show. So is Michaela Boehm, actually. And the Queen's Code, I'll say up front, it can be as triggering as hell. So if you get partway into it and then are hating me and thinking, why on earth has she recommended this? Keep going with it. It probably means you're going to get a whole lot from it. Also, we've done lots of podcasts. Believe it or not, before I say this, I think this is, and I can't believe this is true, but I think it's true. I think this is the first solo podcast episode I've ever done on the feminine, which is mind-blowing. I don't know why I haven't done one before. I've done one on things like feminine leadership. I think it's the only one I've done specifically on the feminine. However, we have over the years done lots with guests talking about things related to the feminine. So what I'll make sure we do is add some of the best ones to the show notes. So if you are feeling like you'd like to hear more on this topic, we'll make sure there's podcast recommendations lined up there for you. And then another thing I'd really recommend is to spend time with others on this path. A really beautiful way of doing so is joining a women's circle. There's likely, start one if you don't have one in your area, but have a look around. I'd say in most areas these days, you will find there are women on this path who are gathering together in circle. And I won't be running it again for a while. I'm not quite sure when, but likely. I really do genuinely wait for the feminine to tell me, right, okay, time to run another Wake Wild Feminine. I never know in advance if I will. I'm going on the idea now because it's happened for the last 4 years. Chances are I'm not going to get a break next year and I'll be told to run another one next year at some point. I don't know when it is. But if you would like to register your interest for the next Wake Wild Feminine, whenever it happens, I'll make sure again the link's below, but the link for that is primalhappiness.co/WTWF. So quite simple, primalhappiness.co/WTWF. If you go there, register your interest. When we do create the next one and enroll for it, you'll be one of the first to know. If you are hearing a call to that, it is very much worth registering the interest because it always sells out really quickly. This time, I think we opened for enrollment in June. It was starting in November, and I think it had sold out within less than a month. I think it was 2 weeks, 3 weeks maximum. All the spaces are gone. So it's one of those ones to hop on quickly and register your interest if you would like to know when I do run the next one. Again, I don't know when that would be. So that could be for you. Okay. And what else would I like to share you? So if you would just like more of this goodness, more of the Wake the Wild goodness, if you are watching this either in our Facebook group or on YouTube and you don't already listen to our podcast, that obviously would be a good idea. That's at primalhappiness.co/podcast. If conversely, you're listening to this on the podcast and you are not already in our group, I would really suggest go joining that. There's all sorts of gorgeous things that happen in this, but also you can join me for the next pre-show party. And that's at facebook.com/group/primalhappiness. Also, if you don't want to miss out on all the amazing things we're creating all the time, do sign up for our Moonly newsletter. And if you are watching this in our pre-show party live in the Facebook group, you can register now, which means you'll get tomorrow's Moonly news, including Sarah's new moon ritual. And that's at primalhappiness.co/Moonly, primalhappiness.co/Moonly. Oh my goodness, almost forgot. Medicine, Wake the Wild medicine. So our next Wake the Wild Crucible, we're enrolling for. We have open for enrollment, but we haven't actually said much about this yet, just because we've been so busy. That's at primalhappiness.co/medicine. And this is it's actually hard to find the right word to capture the magic that is Wake the Wild medicine. Magic is probably the best one I can use. It's incredible. It's incredible. It is deep, deep, deep work to uncover the medicine that you came here to be, and then be able to bring that and give it to the world. It is something that is so close to my heart, both because it's been so much my own personal journey, going from thinking I was weird and struggled to fit into the world. And as often is the case, the people that are drawn to Wake and Wild medicine, they've often had a similar experience. They often are neurodivergent, like I am. I'm autistic and almost certainly also have ADHD, plus a cornucopia of other neurodivergencies. And have spent a lifetime struggling to fit in. They may not know the neurodivergent, but they've experienced themselves as different, as sensitive, as awkward, as weird. And they also have this sense that surely I'm here for more. And that either because they've struggled to kind of get a footing in this material world, or like me, they've managed to, and often quite successfully, but always felt like this isn't really what I was here for. And that's certainly, I always had this experience like I'm waiting for my life to start. I'm waiting to find the thing. And the other part that's really important for me is that people get the opportunity to be their medicine, to do their soul work and make a living from it, not just do it as a hobby, not just kind of do it on the side and also then having to work really hard doing something else. Like, why not do what you came here to do, have a ball doing it, change lives, be your medicine for other people, and be able to make a living, receive all the abundance that's meant for you. So that's what Wake the Wild medicine is about. As you can hear, it really is something that I just adore doing. It really is just such beautiful work. So if you're feeling the call, I say we've not really started actively enrolling, but already a couple of places have gone. We're in conversation with others. So if that sounds like it's for you, go along to primalhappiness.co/medicine. You can arrange to have a call with me or Jonathan. You may well end up having a call with both of us, actually, because again, it's really important for us that we're sure that this is for people. So go book a call, or explore whether indeed you are a medicinal one, and then you can join us when it begins in February. That's everything. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Lots and lots of love to you. Mwah. Goodbye.